Did you know that Ferrari could have altered Hamilton's car without his consent just before a race? And that this action ended in an accident that could have been avoided? What Vasseur revealed after the Netherlands GP could be the most serious technical scandal of the hybrid era. Are we facing a betrayal within Ferrari? Everything pointed out that it would be a strategic Sunday, with favorable climatic conditions and without great external threats. From the training return, Hamilton's car showed stability, and its rhythm during the first laps was consistent, placing itself comfortably among the top 6. The radios did not report anomalies. The telemetrias in appearance did not show alert signs. But then, on Vuelta 23, everything crumbled. In one of the most technical sections of the layout, just when leaving curve 10 to the 11, Hamilton's car was abruptly out of control. An exaggerated correction of the steering wheel, a sudden loss of grip on the rear axle, and a track exit without the possibility of recovery. The car ended in the Lica, with visible damage and Hamilton abandoning the race in a sepulchral silence, even disconnected from the equipment's radio. Then the questions arose. Was it a mechanical failure? A completely unusual pilot error in a 7-times champion? Or something more complex? Onboard cameras showed a nervous car, which responded unpredictably to each direction change. From the first day, some comments from Hamilton pointed to a feeling of disconnection with the rear train. But the engineers had attributed it to the natural evolution of the setup. They never imagined that this instability was a symptom of something deeper. The accident was not just an isolated incident. It was the drop that burst a glass that had been filled silently over the weekend. Because from free training, Ferrari's technicians had already registered an anomaly. Hamilton's SF25 did not behave as the simulator models foresee. There was a subtle difference, almost imperceptible to the naked eye, but constant. A gap between expected and real. And that is where the true story begins. An altered data history, hidden decisions, and a technical structure that acted on its own. Because what was discovered later would not only change the way the accident was interpreted, but would put internal trust within the Scuderia Ferrari. The true scandal dimension in Ferrari began to emerge hours after Hamilton's abandonment, when the technical team decided to review the telemetry records in more detail. What they found not only ignited all the alarms in Maranello, but forced to open an urgent internal investigation, even before the car was returned to the garage. The first thing that caught the attention was that Hamilton's SF25 had been behaving during the weekend radically different from what the team simulators projected. The data correlation between track and virtuality was broken. And that, in a structure like Ferrari, is not just a technical error, it is a symptom that someone at some point in the process has intervened in an unauthorized way. The audit revealed something unprecedented. A series of technical adjustments made to the car between Friday night and Saturday morning, just before the classification. Settings that had not been requested by the pilot. They were not discussed with their career engineer. And the most serious, that they did not have the knowledge or approval of Fred Vasseur. Among the modified parameters were the rear conduction height and the preload of the differential, two elements that, although they may seem secondary to the average amateur, are essential in the dynamic equilibrium of a modern car. The conduction height defines how much the rear of the car is approaching to the ground, and directly affects the aerodynamic flow, the braking behavior, and the curve support. The preload of the differential, on the other hand, regulates how the torque is distributed between the rear wheels, determining whether the car is more aggressive or docile at the curve outlet. Hamilton, during free training, had worked carefully to find a perfect balance. Its precise, linear, extremely technical pilot style depends on the rear axle being predictable and stable. It is your trust zone. What happened with these modifications was that this stability evaporated. The car became nervous. I lost traction without warning. The differential responded erratically just at the time of releasing the brake and attacking the curve. In a nutshell, Hamilton lost the connection with his machine. The question asked in the paddock was immediate: who authorized these changes? And the answer was even more disturbing. The modifications left the so-called Ferrari Central Performance Group, an elite unit within the team, in charge of supervising and optimizing the parameters of all monoplays. This division, although work in close collaboration with track engineers, has autonomy to execute adjustments if you consider that they can benefit the general performance. Because when the star pilot of your team feels that he cannot trust the data he receives, nor in the hands that adjust his car, competitiveness is in the background. What is at stake is the fundamental relationship that a Formula One team works: mutual trust. And Ferrari at that time had lost it. When Fred Vasseur read the first full report on the modifications made to Hamilton SF25, His reaction was not simply technical discomfort. It was an emotional reaction. A mixture between betrayal, disbelief, and silent fury. Because for a team leader who had arrived in Ferrari with the promise to restore order, transparency, and competitiveness, what had happened in Zandvoort was, in essence, an institutional blow from within. The first thing that Vasseur did was stop all the operations of the Central Performance Group. He ordered a temporary blockade of access to shared systems and requested an immediate meeting with the direct managers of that unit. It was not a simple review. It was the beginning of a purge. During that meeting, which according to internal sources was held at the Ferrari hospitality just hours after the accident, Vasseur was blunt. He directly asked who had authorized the changes. No one responded clearly. Responsibilities were launched from an engineer to another. And the most serious, several of them assured that these modifications were routine adjustments, a term that in Formula One has a clear and dangerous meaning, since it suggests that this was not the first time that changes were made without consulting the pilot. For Vasseur, that revelation was devastating, because the problem was no longer just what had happened with Hamilton on that weekend. The problem was systemic. If the culture within the team allowed a car to be manipulated without informing the pilot, then there was a root failure. A failure that undermined the most basic principle of any F1 structure: operational trust. Hamilton, meanwhile, did not make explosive statements in public. But in private, his anger was notorious. Demanded explanations. He wanted to know what motivated the changes and who had executed them. And above all, why nobody warned him. Because in a category where every millimeter matters, being surprised with a car that does not respond as it should not only be frustrating, is dangerous. It is playing with the security of a pilot. Vasseur quickly understood that the conflict could not be resolved only with internal apologies or administrative sanctions. This required a complete restructuring of the technical decision flow within the team, a redefinition of roles, a new command chain where it is clear that no change may be implemented without a direct validation of the pilot and its career engineer. At this point, the fracture was deep. It was not only tense relationships. The environment within Ferrari had become toxic. Engineers distrusting each other, pilots demanding greater control over their cars, and a team leader who felt that he had lost control over a critical part of his technical structure. In addition, Vasseur knew that this scandal had implications beyond paddock. The specialized press already smelled blood. The cameras began to follow each gesture of Hamilton. Social networks exploded with theories that went from internal sabotage to conspiracies in favor of Leclerc. And Ferrari, with his historical legacy, could not afford another year stained by internal disorganization. The most painful thing for Vasseur is that this situation happened in the year in which Ferrari finally seemed to have a car capable of fighting for the championship. The SF25 was not perfect, but it was competitive. The incorporation of Hamilton had raised the technical level of the team. The simulator work had intensified. Communication with Leclerc was fluid. And yet, all that progress now hung from a thread. Vasseur, in the following hours, personally written a new internal directive. From that moment on, no technical group within Ferrari could act independently in terms of car's configuration. All decisions should be validated in a tripartite meeting between the pilot, his track engineer, and a technical delegate designated by Vasseur himself. No more autonomy. No more surprises. The Hamilton accident in Zandvoort was not simply a sports loss or a technical failure in an agitated season. It was a breakdown. And as always happens in Formula One, an event of this magnitude generates replicas that go far beyond the Domingo de Carrera. What began as an internal investigation became a structural earthquake within Ferrari, whose effects began to feel both inside and outside the paddock. At the sports level, the consequences were immediate. Ferrari lost valuable points in a championship where each unit counts. The Scuderia cannot afford to give positions when facing a growing Mercedes and a Red Bull that, although more vulnerable than in previous seasons, remains lethal in the hands of Verstappen. Each abandonment of Hamilton not only represents lost points, it is a missed opportunity to consolidate as serious contenders to the title of builders. And in this case, it was an abandonment caused from within, not by external factors. And while all this happened, the media focus intensified. The specialized media began to talk about a control crisis in Ferrari. Comparisons with dark years of the team, where internal policy devoured track performance, resurfaced strongly. And although Vasseur did his best to put out the fire with institutional communications, the story had already escaped his hands. What do you think? Was this an internal sabotage or a poorly managed technical error? Can Hamilton recover trust after what happened? Or do you think this wound will mark its passage through Ferrari forever? Should Vasseur make more radical decisions, even if that implies completely reorganizing the technical structure of the equipment? I want to know your opinion. Leave it down in the comments.